All right, so yeah, we're going to discuss what the objectosphere. I think. I mean, that's my hobby is the objectosphere, whatever that means, and the troubles or turmoils or the fun stuff going on inside of it.
Okay.
And what did you have in mind for what we shall cover?
I think that's a good launch pad. I'm sure there's kind of more deeper level stuff we can get into. So you've been getting into some controversy. I think it seems to me like a lot of miscommunication and maybe misunderstandings. So, like you're using the word objectivist in a way that I think is grouping different people together that aren't necessarily the same. So, I believe I was paying attention. You started using it. So you did a response to Ari Armstrong's critique of the objectivist ethics, and you were rightfully assertive with Mr. Armstrong, and some people told you to be a little bit more easy, and you said, no, all you objectivists, stop telling me to be nice. Now, there are what we call the firebrands, and there are what we call the ambassadors, but the objectivists or people you might call objectivists because you know their position on Trump or immigration, they could also be firebrands, or people that want to be kind of apologetic about, you know, kind of appeasing and apologetic and ambassadorial. They might agree with you on immigration or China or Trump. So I think using the word objectivist, it kind of confuses everybody, and it makes it harder to understand where you're coming from because you're kind of also grouping yourself with some people that reject objectivism in its essence. I think they flirt a lot with biological determinism. They're not really objectivist if objectivism is a philosophy that's airtight.
Well, who do I cavort with that flirts with biological determinism? Did you see the Onar video I did today?
No, I didn't, but I saw you a few weeks ago responding to the Italian gentleman with the Confederate flag, and he was talking about objectivism, and that him and his friend, I think, are the ones who kind of invented that term, and he's not an objectivist. He disagrees with the blank slate. I don't know how else, like, he doesn't... I think you and I are objectivists from everything that I've been able to gauge. We could still disagree a lot on the application of objectivism or what to do about the world as we find it today. But, qua philosophy, there is no determinism as far as the choices that a person makes. He's not determined by his race. He's not even determined by his environment. He might be influenced by both of those things, but ultimately he has the choice. He is born with no innate content, with no innate knowledge.
Right. Now, it's interesting you say this because just 2 hours ago I was in the middle of a long conversation with Onar from Norway about this, an objectivist in Norway. Mm-hmm. And we talked a long time about it. You should probably watch the video because if I've flirted with genetic determinism ever, it came right up to the screen in that video. And he kept suggesting it, and I said, but I don't see where you're getting this work done with genes. I can do all this work with ideas. Then he says, okay, 97% of people in jail for murder are men, 3% are women. Does genes have anything to do with that?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's his knockdown argument. Do genes have anything to do with the murder rate between men and women?
Look, I mean, there's clearly a difference between men and women, but like also why are most inventions done by men, or why are most there is a difference between men and women, but okay, let me put it this way. Men have more of a temper often than women do. But the content of what pisses off a man depends on philosophy, and he's not born with that information. He's not born knowing like whether to be angered by infidels or whether to be angered by the regulation of the economy. Like there's that. So that's the point. The fact that more violent crime is committed by men it could have something to do with men being more kind of naturally aggressive and maybe prone to being aggressive. But again, what it is that they choose to resort to force over, I think certainly comes from philosophy, from their beliefs, from, isn't that what politics really is? The study of force, when to use it? So,
yeah. Now,
so look, there's a lot we don't know about people. Psychology is still in the Stone Ages, in my opinion. There's a lot to learn, but the first thing to understand going into psychology is the axioms, philosophy, what it is that I as an individual can need to hold axiomatically as I pursue knowledge.
yeah. Well, so if there is at least a little bit of wiggle room there, then to say genes have something to do with it, or are innate something, right? We can't say innate knowledge. We're not allowed to. Somebody will come and spank our hand. But as objectivists, we have these certain things we have to not say, like innate knowledge. But what is it? It's an innate tendency for man as opposed to women to be more aggressive, or is it just in the nature of males as such that physical violence is part of their domain and therefore they have the predisposition for it or something? I mean, however we say it, there it is. 97% of murderers are men. How are we going to say it, though?
Again, there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot I don't know. But I do know that knowledge, that content is not there. It's not passed through us through the bloodline. It is, content is learned.
Right.
So yeah, like most men are the ones fighting wars. Most men are the ones building things. It's not, I don't know why that is. I don't know if in the objectivist future, if we'll see that disparity lessen or if it'll only get wider. I don't know. But I take issue with people pointing to biology as the essence, as the important part of what makes a person make the choices that he does. Give me a group of Aborigines in Australia who allegedly have the lowest IQ in the world, and give them Aristotle and Ayn Rand, and then take a group of Ashkenazi Jews who allegedly have the highest IQ, and give them Kant and Hegel and Rousseau and whoever else, and we'll see who does something positive and who is able to live a better life. So I always take issue with people kind of looking at the status quo today and saying, well, explain this, explain the crime rate in black neighborhoods. Of course, the biological determinists love to point at African countries or at predominantly black neighborhoods, but I would point to the fact that the blacks were trending upwards and they were moving increasingly towards individualism, as were most Americans before the 1960s, at which point it became the intellectual position of everyone in the colleges, in the black communities. Everyone was telling black people to think of yourself as part of this group, not as an individual. Think of yourself as part of a group, and your moral calling is to give back to your community, and that thinking independently is, quote, acting white, and pursuing personal selfish values is acting white, and going to school to study what you want to study is acting white. And that comes from everywhere. It comes from the media, it comes from teachers, it comes from professors. That is, other than objectivists, that is pretty much what blacks get everywhere. And that's, I mean, you can judge the way a person behaves once they've kind of emerged from that system, but you do need to hold that context in mind. So philosophy, it can help people, it can help a culture thrive, or it can depress a culture and make the people living in that culture very inept and psychologically damaged. So again, philosophy is what we need to control for, and it's very difficult to control for philosophy, which is why most psychological studies are, in my opinion, missing something.
Oh, well, off onto psychological studies as a topic there. Yeah, that would drive me crazy. That stuff's terrible. Oh, what do we have?
Okay, Brandon, I couldn't hear you just now. The audio here cuts out at my end.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can, yeah.
Oh, okay. Good deal. So let's see. What am I meant to reply to there? The people who want racial determinism definitely aren't going to be able to do it without philosophy. They have to turn off and on their racial events using ideas. So there's no reason to have their racial events. Like, for example, like Candace Owens, she's not a criminal, and the sheriff, David Clark, he's not a criminal, but they're black. So they're going to use ideas at the end of the day. So they lose. So in my view, genetic determinism loses because the individual can think, and it is an individual basis. But if on a racial level, if there's any evidence at all for if there's any fact at all to the idea that some people are more violent than others on a racial level, we would have to have some objective evidence for it. And then that's when they bring in, as you mentioned, the high crime in black neighborhoods or whatever. So, on their way of thinking, that's objective evidence for something. And if you ask me, I'll point to the NBA. I'll say, why are 85 or 90% of them black? That's objective evidence for some sort of genetic something.
Look, genetics definitely exist. It's quite possible that Latinos are naturally more rhythmic and better dancers than Chinese people. That's quite possible. I'm wide open to that idea. But in terms of moral decisions, in terms of rational thought, we're all basically on the same. Look, unless you're mentally retarded, you're able to observe reality and then act according to your judgment. And it's the intellectual leaders of the ages that have almost always told the individual that he cannot observe reality objectively for himself independently, and he certainly can't make moral decisions for his own sake. It needs to be for some allegedly higher calling. So again, it's very difficult to be scientific when looking at human beings when we haven't controlled for philosophy, for the influence of ideas on a person's life. But as far as why blacks are the best at basketball, I mean, a big part of that could be genetic. Obviously, most basketball players are very tall, but also, I don't know, it also could be largely cultural. It could be the fact that a lot more black babies are given a basketball by their family members than your average Korean. But again, I'm not married to this. I'm not married to the idea that everything needs to be a blank slate and everyone, that's more like the postmodern left where they think everything is a social construct. I'm not saying that. I'm only saying as far as decisions go, as far as choices, people do act on what they believe to be true and what they believe to be the right decision. And that is the province of philosophy. And that's where the work needs to be. That's the battle.
Yeah. Now, so I think viewing things from this lens, we could say that Japan is doing what it legitimately has a right to do. If there are any differences among peoples of the world, then they have a right to have their own spot. And simultaneously, I'm going to claim that that's not going to work in the long run, and your better option is to be the melting pot empire that grows and grows and grows. But I don't see if we have a right philosophically to tell them to open up their home and let people come in there.
I think what they're doing is anti-individualistic, and they have no moral claim against somebody telling them that what they're doing is wrong. Now, if a free country or a freer country or a more of a melting pot type of country should then go over there and force them, that's obviously a very different question. There's no reason to do that unless somehow they're threatening our way of life. If there's evidence that Japan having closed doors is leading them to attack us, then we need to go over there and change their attitude about that. But of course, that's quite a leap.
Yeah. So if somebody locks their front door, they aren't necessarily hurting you.
If somebody locks their front door, right, they're not. Well, okay, but again, a person locking their front door is not exactly the same, in my opinion, as a country wanting to be homogenous. Those are two quite different things. What is a country? It's a sum of individuals. It's a bunch of individuals living in a region with one government covering that region, and the individuals in that region have certain requirements for living. So the rights that John Locke observed and that Ayn Rand, I think, kind of made better and sort of modernized and secularized completely are true about all human beings everywhere. And they would all be wise to to protect them, to live as though those rights are a requirement for living. But of course, we need to somebody needs to do it first, and I'd like to see Americans understand this and live by it. If I expect anyone else around the world to get it.
Yeah, and I think that, all things considered, I think we do. I think we do pretty good in America. I know we do a lot of naughty stuff, but I like the fact that EPA has been shut down by Trump. But the EPA is very naughty. But then those laws are not written by our representatives. Those laws are written by bureaucrats. They're just like put in place by... And so we need to stop the government from having that type of power. In Europe, this shit gets cemented in place and you can't get it out of place. But in America, I think we have the basic laws. So I think we're going to do okay in America. So what do you...
I hope we do, but ultimately the clock is ticking. If we don't, as I think Rand put it, like, not return to morality, but discover it. I think it was John Galt's speech. Ultimately, the clock is ticking. I do see that we are basically running on fumes of the past. I think in the dim hypothesis, I think Peikoff points out that the only thing that seems to be holding America together, like keeping us from becoming authoritarian completely, is sort of like the ghosts of the founding fathers. Like, we still sort of seem to have this cultural allegiance to them, even though intellectually nobody really respects them. I mean, you ask any prominent intellectual today about the founding fathers, they'll say, oh, that they were cute. They thought the individual can be free and must be free. That's cute, but we've evolved from that. We've gotten more sophisticated. We have more of a statist setup now. I think we do. I think the clock is ticking. And I judge. I think checks and balances are a great thing. They're an excellent feature for a free country, for a country that protects the rights of the individuals. Checks and balances are great. However, the nature of a law should be evaluated by whether or not it protects the rights of the individual. So I'm glad Trump has done things like that with regards to the EPA. But I mean, the main cause for celebration there is that the EPA was violating the rights of people, producers, of individuals living in America. But let's talk about Trump. Obviously, this is a hot button issue. I find it's weird to me, the amount of objectivists that see this as such an important thing. And I appreciate the fact that politics have immediate consequences, so it is urgent. I get that. I think I get that. But as objectivists, I think we should be able to understand that that there are kind of bigger implications, that there are sort of indications of what's coming when we look at the political scene. So the like who the president is and what our politicians are sounding like and talking like is a great indication of where we are as a culture. So even if what they're doing today is not as bad as they could be, there still may be cause for concern. I think what bothers a lot of objectivists about Trump is not necessarily that his policy is problematic, is violating people's rights, although there probably might be some of that as well. But the main problem is his attitude. He doesn't strike me as somebody that respects rule of law. He doesn't strike me as somebody that's read the Constitution. He speaks about this country like we're a group of like a family, like we're a group of people with a geography in common. Not that we're tied together by principles, not that we're tied together by the founding documents, but rather we are people in a geographical region with a shared history. And that is why he excites the alt-right. That is why he excites the new right, I guess, because he doesn't talk about the ideas of this country. It's because he talks about, him taking care of us as though he's our father. So,
well, I was going to say earlier about the people out in the red counties throughout this country. You ask an intellectual what they think about the founding fathers, and they think one thing, but you ask the people, the bumpkins, the country bumpkins, and they have a totally different view of the founding fathers. And they stand up for the flag when it comes around at the parade and stuff. There's a lot of them out there, and those are the people that elected Trump. Now,
I lived. Okay, I'll let you finish. Sorry to interrupt.
No. If you have something cogent, go ahead.
Look, I lived in Michigan for a very long time. I've moved around this country. I understand there is sort of this salt of the earth kind of positivity. There is sort of an individualistic spirit, but it is, it has been diluted often. It has been mixed with religion. The founding fathers have been sort of married to the Bible by a lot of people. So I think there is cause for concern. I think conservatives, let's talk about this. What it is that drew me to start talking about objectivism, because for many years I was just doing my music and staying out of philosophy in the public light. But what drew me to want to talk about objectivism was seeing the trends, seeing the way the sort of anti-SJWs were moving. Right, there was like the social justice left sort of went haywire and came out of their shell around 2014, 2015, and this whole kind of movement of left-leaning people started speaking out and saying, "Hey, hold on, this is stupid." And suddenly, it's like this whole giant group of people were kind of looking for a new way. And when I saw people moving towards nationalism as sort of the antithesis to the social justice left, when I see them moving towards people like Jordan Peterson, who kind of intellectualizes religion and makes it sort of palatable and respected by intellectuals, when I see guys like Ben Shapiro, whose worldview I know all too well, when I see him as being seen as kind of an anti-social justice hero and a champion of capitalism, I'm worried. I hope I don't need to be as worried as I am, but I think it's not so much the left that made me want to speak out. It really is kind of what I see as the menu that people are presented with, and that objectivism is not on that menu. It made me really want to speak out. So it's people like Dennis Prager and Jordan Peterson that I kind of see as they're getting minds and hearts that should be ours.
Yeah, I think so too. That's
Hold on, audio cut out again. Sorry, this keeps happening.
No, you're all right. Am I
Okay.
back on?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, and the whole lot. I think that they are a very dangerous demographic, and they are better than the left, and that's what's dangerous. They are head and shoulders above the left. They're way better than the left. In fact, at this point, if you would just start going to church and reading the Bible every week, you'd be better than the left. Like virtually anybody who doesn't go rape and rob is better than the left.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sunk to the point. Now, I came back on and started paying attention and said, all right, I better do some work here, because it looks like the right is a big tent, really big, and tents can only get so big, and it's going to collapse, and people are going to be trapped inside, and it's going to be a hell of a circus. So we've got atheists, we've got the objectivists. Dave Rubin has got the objectivists over here on the right. I mean, if the objectivists are anywhere, he's trying to put us over there, and if anybody fits with what we're saying, then it's people over there. It's certainly not the left, which is groupthink and always check with the group and never dissent from the group. That's leftism. And the right is, do whatever the fuck you want, just leave other people alone. So we have a big tent, yeah, and I think that we need to tell people Jordan Peterson is not brilliant. He's just rehashing old stuff from the past, and he himself doesn't really have anything to say. He didn't even have a definition for truth when he first came on the stage. You remember that scandal?
You're talking about at the conference?
With Sam Harris back
Oh, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
a couple of years ago now it is. But so he's an amateur as far as philosophy goes. Brilliant as he is in psychology, and there's a snake in the garden and stuff, and that's all very brilliant. There's always a snake in the garden. Very brilliant stuff, but amateurish philosophically, and he's huge. So there's a need for this. There's a desperate need. And where is objectivism going to fill this in? Just go out there and say, A is A, everybody, the axioms, where do we sink our teeth in? Where do we go from here?
So I think the way to do that is to contrast ourselves with religious people and to contrast ourselves with the right, with conservatives. I saw you the other day when Yaron posted a video called something like Conservatives, Anti-Capitalism, Anti-Individualism. And I like that. That's like something Ayn Rand would have said. That's like she saw conservatives as like, didn't she say capitalism's biggest problem is its alleged defenders.
Yeah.
So, like, I love seeing Iran show his teeth. I wish more objectivists were contrasting objectivism with everything else, because it really is objectivism versus everything else. But I remember you not being so pleased. You said, I think you were saying, "Oh, come on, Iran, come on." Isn't that something that sound like you?
He said we need to decentralize, right? So here,
no. That's not what I'm referring to. It was about him naming his video clip conservatives, anti-capitalism.
But in my comment, I was referring to. He said we need to decentralize, not bring more centralization. And Trump's just he called Trump the centralizer in chief, right? Who's the only president we've ever had that tried to get the government out of education.
Oh, I must have misunderstood you then. I thought you were telling him, I mean, because I remember you saying, like, "Oh, come on, Iran. Republicans have always been better on capitalism and the market." Am I misquoting you? Because I remember taking note of this in preparation for our conversation.
We've always been better at capitalism and freedom?
I think so, yeah. I think that's what I think you were taking issue with him naming his video.
Better than the left? I mean, how is that controversial?
I mean, it's not that Republicans are worse than the left, but again, we need to distinguish ourselves from these seemingly fellow travelers. The Republicans are the ones who, to my knowledge, I mean, you're kind of a historian. Where did antitrust first get proposed? Who's out there right now saying that they want the government to regulate social media? It's obvious. It's certainly the right. It's certainly coming from Tucker Carlson and even Ben Shapiro, the guy who I used to think was a capitalist. But because he's a pragmatist as far as politics go, unless if you start a business in your mother's womb, then Ben Shapiro will defend your rights to the death. But once you're out of the womb, now your property rights only consist with its value to the community and society.
No, you're right. The conservatives wanted to protect freedom. That's where antitrust laws came in, because antitrust laws were stopping competition, and we want competition. So it was a misunderstanding of the whole situation. So now antitrust laws are more of a disaster than anything that we had previously. So the conservatives want censorship laws, and we turn the censorship laws into what's offensive. What is offensive? Oh, hate speech. So now we've got hate speech laws because we wanted to censor porn. So the conservatives are always leading the way towards the disaster because nobody trusts the liberals. We already know what they want to do. They're a total disaster anyway. So the conservatives have to make a mistake to take us down that road. Now, what's the answer to this? I don't know. It looks like you say, we're running on fumes and so on. But occasionally, in that analogy, refueling must be possible. And it looks like the Soviet Union refueled, or Russia refueled when the Soviet Union fell apart. And China refueled. China was just moving worse and worse and just disintegrating worse and worse. And then they said, no, we're going to stop this shit. We're going to build some factories, right? And so it is possible for a country to turn around and go the other way. Even if it's just a couple steps backwards. Maybe it's not a total reversal like Russia. Russia didn't totally reverse. They just said, let's not be so insane anymore. Let's have a little bit of free trade here. So it's possible to go slightly towards the better. If so, I think Trump is evidence that the United States is having a little teeny breather here.
I mean, I hope that's true. Look, I'm rooting for that, but it doesn't really seem that way when Trump is tweeting out, "We are keeping a close eye on Facebook," he said after they deleted, I think, Paul Joseph Watson and Lauren Southern. He tweeted out, "We are keeping a close eye on them." What did he mean? We're curious to see what Facebook will do as impartial observers? No, the president is holding a gun. He's holding a nuclear arsenal, and he's saying, "We're keeping a close eye on you." I'm troubled. I'm troubled by the right, and even when we talk about conservatives, it's like with each generation, today's the conservatives of the day are picking up what the left threw away the generation before. I mean, today's Republicans, what are they? It's like they're fighting for yesterday's progressive society. Nobody is fighting for pure, unadulterated individual rights being protected. Nobody, other than objectivists. So, I guess I see no common ground with the right. I see them as sort of what's wrong. If they would just fuck off, then it could just be like reason, individualism, and capitalism versus the nihilistic left. And of course, any sensible person would rather go with the former.
Well, I think there are a lot of people in the United States who can't be bothered to worry about this shit, but if you ask them, do you want to be left alone or do you want somebody bossing you around? They're going to want to be left alone. And those are our people. Like it or not, they're the ones that are going to vote for us and fight our wars. The ones who want to be left alone.
But before we get to the voting booth and before we get to the battlefield, the physical battlefield, there's the battle of ideas. So it's important for objectivists to state very clearly, here's the difference between Rand and Peterson. Here's the difference between objectivism and conservatism or whatever. Here's the difference between objectivism's take on capitalism and politics versus Ben Shapiro's.
Right.
So clarity is an important one to me. And, when I look at the new right that has emerged, when I look at Lauren Southern, I don't see her as a fellow traveler. I don't see Paul Joseph Watson as a fellow traveler. I mean, there's a certain, I guess, dopamine kick I might get from watching one of them take on the left. But I would be very concerned. I mean, I suggest being concerned. These people are not champions of individualism. They just clearly aren't. So isn't there? So I guess, I mean, now you've spoken out against like who you see as sort of objectivist and ARI and all of that. Aren't ARI kind of doing what you and I are saying to do to kind of okay, well, here's what I'm grappling with. Here's what I'm trying to get at. You mentioned a little bit ago that people, like a person going to church, is more value-driven and reality-based than a postmodern nihilist who rejects all of reality. So then, aren't the objectivists, quote-unquote, right to be worried about Trump when they know that when people reject they reject the left, kind of what's left in front of them is what they're going to go with. And if this new right is emerging, if people are increasingly talking about blood and soil, if people are increasingly losing affinity for the founding documents and moving more towards this kind of nationalism, this sort of group rights or whatever, group nationalism, I'd say, but aren't they right then to see Trump and the right as the sort of bigger threat in the long run?
In the long run, the left is definitely the only threat. The left is definitely the only threat, because if the right poses any threat to us in the long run, it's because they'll adopt the tactics of the left, of censorship and thought control and groupthink and doublespeak. That's the danger from the right, is that it will become the left. So the danger is from the left. My characterization of it is like this. The left is those who group think. The right is everybody else. So if you're a group thinker and you can't think for yourself and you want to follow along, you're going to end up with the left. And if you can think for yourself, then you're probably off doing your own thing. And everybody who's off doing their own thing gets pushed into a corral called the right when the left gets aggressive and starts attacking people, which they always do. That's the only thing they have is weapons. They can't think for themselves because they're groupthink. So that's how I characterize the situation. It's the group thinkers versus everybody else, and that's why the right is such a big tent. That's why we've got everybody. We've got atheists, nationalists, statists, white supremacists, black people, black Blexit, black exit. Everybody's on the right.
But aren't all these people also thinking as groups?
Well, that's our job, is to go and tell them, you've left the left because you're individuals. Not because you're individual tribes, but because you're individual humans and you want your individual rights respected. You don't want your race respected. You don't want your group respected. If you were doing that shit, you would be on the left. So our job of objectivists is to say, it's a good job you guys are here. Now, why have you here? Why, what are you doing here? What's the real thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what I sort of see as the game plan as well, kind of to talk to people that are sort of disaffected, disillusioned with this, with the rising left, and try to kind of intercept them before they become, right-wing collectivists. But I do see that happening. I see the right increasingly embracing identity politics and or religion or anything else that is not reason on an individualism.
Well,
so yeah.
Can the United States of America protect the individual rights of the people inside of it while doing something like locking up a certain racial minority in camps? Could we lock up a certain racial minority in camps just because of the color of their skin or national affiliation, and then go about a project which protected rights?
I don't know. I mean, I know there were internment camps with the Asians here.
Yeah. So I'm saying maybe it's a mixed bag. Maybe like history's going to roll forward in a sort of messy way, and we're riding the elephant, and our job is to make the elephant look good. But we can't get off the elephant, and there's no way we can do it on our own. We're riding an elephant. So history's a mess. We're in the United States of America. It has given the power to coin money to the government, and that's probably not going to be reversed anytime soon. It's a lot of power. So we've got to sort of figure out what we're doing in the reality we live in. And in this reality we live in, there are two groups. There are groupthink people, and there's everybody else. That's my opinion of it.
Yeah, I mean, but I think this everyone else is a minuscule amount of people, because virtually everyone is going with if they're not just going with the mainstream nihilistic egalitarian postmodernism that seems to be everywhere. They seem to be moving towards nationalism. They seem to be moving towards, or like religion, taking religion seriously seems to be an emerging trend. People like Peterson made religion respectable, making it intellectually respected.
Well, in my view, they're moving away from the left, which is collectivism, and they don't have anywhere to go, and that's the problem. They say we don't want this. We don't want to lose our individual identity and our individual rights and whatever. We don't want to lose individualism, so we're going to go over here and do our thing. Now, how do we? Then they have no idea what's going on. They're just over there in a group being shouted at as racist by the other side. So
they aren't speaking the language of individualism. At first, you would hear that kind of thing from people like Sargon, but like after a little bit of time has passed, like they kind of got pushed, like their premises were being challenged. I like to think I played a small part in pushing Sargon to the point of him needing to make a decision, and of course he went with groupthink. He went with nationalism, with Englishness, like this national identity. So ultimately, I mean, these people rejecting the social justice left, they don't really have the confidence to go with the opposite, or most of them, they don't even know there is a better option out there.
But now I present objectivism as these principles of freedom and individualism in a philosophy. It's in a philosophy that we can justify. It's not in the blood nation of Britain or in the traditions of the Germanic people or in the Aryan skin color or whatever. It's a philosophy. So that's what we're taking to them, and that's a tall order. I mean, we are going to go to Candace Owens and Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin and say, we've got a philosophy for you here. And we've tried it. Dave Rubin has come to us. So at some point, I think we need to realize that these people are more on our side than you might be giving them credit for. Some of these people.
They're more on our side, but
they're less collectivist, and they're less dangerous, and they're less likely to go collectivist than they're being given credit for. If they had that tendency, they would have stayed on the left. They wouldn't have went running and screaming trying to find principles.
I agree that they're not as bad, but they're more likely to succeed because people don't want pure nihilism. They want something that resembles values and a coherent worldview. So they tend to go with kind of whatever was there before the egalitarian left came about. And what was there was largely this biological deterministic view of man and nationalism, of course, which ironically the progressives devised, and that today conservatives hold on to as like their last vestige of hope. I forgot what else I was going to say.
Well, the conservatives can't really come up with anything new. That's not really their job. They don't like new shit. So
when you said Rubin, like did you say he's on our side or something?
No,
like
he
that?
tried to bring us into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean it's.
So my view is, like, I know these farmers from Utah. I'm from Utah. I know farmers who are never going to give a shit about philosophy, and they're also never going to give up their guns, and they're also never going to let people come and take their land or whatever. Like when Clive Bundy and them 300 people showed up with rifles and the federal agents left. And they are serious. They are ready for a fight if it ever comes to it, and they will show up in large numbers. Those people, to think that they're going to go out and start violating rights and be group collectivist thinkers is just bizarre. It's just bizarre. It's against the nature of the way they act. You might question their philosophical foundation, and that's true. Their philosophical foundation's a total mess. But they are not on a hair trigger to becoming Nazis. They are not leftists. They are individualists.
I'm not calling them Nazis, but a lot of them would also pick up their gun and act reckless if you took away their farming subsidies. Like these people, America has normalized the lobby system, and when you try to tell Sargon that his individualism means getting rid of the NHS, you lose him. If you tell these salt of the earth Americans that we're trying to get rid of Social Security and subsidies to farmers, you tend to lose them as well. Ultimately, the battle is in universities or any place where ideas are being discussed. I think today there is reason to believe that the internet is a good competitor, I think, a good candidate to compete with the university. And I think this is a place where ideas are spread and people come to learn. But yeah, ultimately the battle is it needs to be waged by intellectuals against intellectuals. It needs to be a philosophical battle. It's not. It ultimately doesn't boil down to the farmers or to just kind of be the man in the street, as he's called.
Well, it will in the year 2020. I mean, it will immediately. I mean, next month and next year, it's that. Ultimately, we do have to do something. I think privatize education. I think that we would own the universities if education were private. I mean, objectivism owns the intellectual discussion, right? They're trying to kick us out of it and hold us down, but everybody's talking about Ayn Rand, so now they're saying, well, okay, Ayn Rand had a few things to say, and they have to admit she's in the room more and more and more. So I think objectivism would own the universities if they were private. There just wouldn't be anybody else teaching in a reasonable manner. There'd be religious schools, but then the religious schools would be putting out people who couldn't think compared to the well-run schools. So I think privatizing education is the key there. That's what I'm saying, I guess.
I mean, I definitely appreciate the emphasis on privatizing education, but I think that's a bit of a bold statement to say Ayn Rand would dominate if education was privatized. Just
objective methods of teaching would be the most successful. Mm-hmm. And so over time, it's just like on the intellectual sphere. Why does every single major intellectual that comes onto the stage, why does everyone scream at them, talk to the objectivists, right? Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin, everybody gets ushered over to the objectivists. Come have a word with the objectivists. Why is that?
I mean, is that how you see it? I know Rubin happens to have a relationship with the Ayn Rand Institute. I don't know how it came about, but I mean, he certainly gets paid to do these events. It's not like he's that curious about objectivism.
No, he's not, but the audience is. The audience says, if you're going to discuss these big ideas, you've got to go sit down with the objectivists. It's part of you.
Is that what you see?
Yeah, with Jordan Peterson and with Dave Rubin, yeah. And Sam Harris, too. Right?
I'm not aware of that. My impression is that Ayn Rand is still largely ignored, even with the progress that's been made. But I hope, if that's what you've observed, I hope it's true. I hope intellectuals are increasingly feeling pressure talk to objectivists and try to debunk it rather than ignore it?
Yeah, or not really debunk it, but admit that it's there, and they can't really speak against it. Jordan Peterson says things about capitalism that would be off the table 20 or 30 years ago. You know, just like free trade and lower taxes and stuff. I mean, he says things about deregulation and all kinds of stuff that he just puts them off the cuff like, oh yeah, of course capitalism is better with a smaller welfare state. You know, 20 or 30 years ago you couldn't say that, but he can say that now.
Look, I hope we are trending in a positive direction. I hope you're right. I mean, I'm feeling, my heart is feeling at peace just hearing you say all this. It's hard for me to suspend what it is that I also see happening constantly, which is that virtually everyone, from Peterson to Harris to Shapiro, the entire intellectual dark web, the intellectual mainstream, and everybody else, they all seem to agree that the individual cannot observe reality directly as it is and live by his judgment accordingly, and let alone is morally to do so. I just see I see the situation as more dire now. I hope there's cause for optimism. I mean, I hope Rand is gaining traction.
I see the situation in the universities and in Europe as more dire than you are characterizing it. And I see the situation in the American political scene as less dire than you are characterizing it. So
yeah. And do we agree the ultimate battle is epistemological? It's not about politics. It's not even about ethics. It is, but it's really ultimately epistemological. It's the theory of concepts. It's the facts versus values. It's all of that.
Yeah, I believe if we had a rational culture like there was, say, in the mid-1700s, then a lot of these things would just make sense to people. You just say to them taxes should be lower, value a good conscience more than praise. How about that? Value a good conscience more than praise. Right? That was just something that kids were forced to write 20 times in their little books when they were, back then. Now praise is everything, Give every kid a trophy. Praise, praise, praise. Praise to the sky. And praise is worth nothing. Value a good conscience. And these things are obvious to our founding father. They grew up in a culture where these things are obvious. Laissez-faire, leave us alone, hands off. Obviously the government doesn't help when they get involved. These things were obvious to our founding fathers.
Yeah. I mean, I can't comment on it whether or not it was obvious, but they certainly were willing to fight for that and to put their life on the line, and then to install a system that operated on that premise. So they were certainly willing to put their money where their mouth was, and that was, of course, the age of reason. That was a time when the individual was seen as capable of observing reality. Today, I mean, since then, it's become very passé to see it that way, which is why, again, I do see the battle as so seemingly hopeless, because nobody seems to be open to the idea that the individual can observe reality and live by his judgment. It's seen as a childish thing to believe.
Well, I think some of them are backing off of that postmodernist shtick. I mean,
but I'm not talking postmodernism. I'm talking even 19th century thinkers. I'm talking,
Kant,
you've been reading Kant on your channel here, and I've been enjoying that. We're all Kantians now, right? We meaning not Brandon and myself, but we're all Kantians now.
Yeah.
Just like we're all mixed economy, we're all Keynesians now, right? Like it's very rare to meet someone who is a capitalist. It's very rare to meet somebody who is an individualist and believes in objective reality that the individual can observe.
Yeah.
So why all this fuss? Why all this is the word I'm looking for, discord between these objectivists and those objectivists? Like, why do you guys have to fight so much? What is it that's happening? Because I don't see why politics should put such a wedge between objectivists when we know that that's not the battle.
If I saw the objectivists around in 1942, they would be just criticizing the United Kingdom and America and just screaming their heads off about everything wrong the United Kingdom and America were doing. That's what I see the objectivists as today. Come on, focus, guys. Like, there's a real battle going on in the world, and Trump is not the problem. Trump's scary. He grabs a little bit of pussy now and then, but he's not the problem.
You don't see him as like the embodiment of this culture of pragmatism. Like he's like the Frankenstein of the pragmatist, the pragmatist Frankenstein. He's the Frankenstein monster. He is just like pragmatism stripped of any pretense at principle, like stripped of any illusion. He is just straight up this hot-headed New Yorker that just says whatever passes through his mind, can contradict himself from one sentence to the next, and sees government as being to be run that way as well.
He wants to take the federal government out of the education scene. He wants to shut down the Federal Department of Education. He did shut down the EPA. He shut down dozens and dozens of lawsuits against companies. He just put them on hold. Mm-hmm. And these companies that had to stop production have gone back to production. He's done a lot of stuff that's not in the press. The red flag laws. He says, okay, let's consider red flag laws. The next day he says we need to red flag this Democrat, and starts immediately showing us what's wrong with red flag laws. Like, give Trump 24 hours and he'll reverse any bad move that he seems to have made. And he's a disaster, but what about FDR? FDR was a commie bastard, right? And he was in charge during World War II, and he defended our nation. So does that mean that everything we did during World War II is a disaster because FDR was in charge? So Trump is not that bad. Compared to Hillary, he certainly is not that bad. And where is the disaster? Like, after Trump was elected, I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. But then I keep hearing these things. He's attacking the unions. He's attacking the EPA. He's rolling back regulations. He said he was going to roll back 2 regulations for every new one on the book. He's taken 16 off for every new one that's been put on since he got it. So he's way over-delivered on that. So, and he's just taken, one of the reasons, because there's a lot of stuff that Obama did that he can just wipe off because it wasn't done through the Congress, So, but yeah, go ahead.
I mean, wouldn't it be better if Trump was doing this with Congress in a way that can't just be overruled by the next president?
Well, he was just taking off Obama's edicts, so some other president will have to put on more edicts.
Look, that's good. I mean, I don't pay very close attention to politics. I hope good things are happening. I see Trump more from the lens of, like, what does he imply about our culture? What does he imply about our attitude about what a government should be? And he doesn't behave, and like you said, he is a disaster. And maybe what you meant is, and what I mean is, he doesn't act like he cares about rule of law. He acts and speaks as though, he's the CEO and he can, and his word is to be. So imagine if this was a Democrat. I mean, he makes Obama seem timid and respectful by comparison. Obama used to play the role of president. Trump he's just like a steam train. Imagine what it's going to feel like when Bernie Sanders is president, or whoever, or AOC, and they're using having the same type of temperament, and pushing a leftist agenda.
Yeah, but I think it's Trump's personality that is him doing that. I don't think other people are going to do it. I don't think they would want to. Nobody wants to be the bore that everybody hates.
But there's clearly enthusiasm around AOC and Bernie.
Yeah, are they boorish like Trump, and maybe Trump's gonna look. I'm not saying that everything always gets better. I'm just saying sometimes things can get better, but we all agree that generally socialism just gets worse and worse over time. But taxes occasionally go down. So no, I'm not saying everything always gets better. Trump might be a slide towards the worse, but for one thing, I just don't think he is as bad as everybody thinks he is, or the left anyway. Like, he was supposed to be racist, and he's going to put gay people in camps and all this shit. Where is it? Come on, where is this materializing? Where is this at? He's almost done with his first term. It had better start sometime soon, right?
That was definitely people crying wolf, but I think there is, like I said earlier, the reason that the racist right is excited by Trump is because he speaks about this country like it's a family, not like not like we're tied together by principles, not like we're tied together by respect for the law. He talks about us as though we're a team, as though he's our team captain and he's going to lead us to the championship. And that excites the blood and soil crowd for a reason. There's a reason that he's their guide. Not blaming Trump, not saying that he himself thinks racist thoughts. I think his whole world is how to market the word Trump. Like, he wants to have the word Trump everywhere. I used to love his show. Look, as an entertainer, I think he and I are, cut from the same cloth. But his attitude towards reality and the way he speaks about government decisions and his attitude towards that, it's troubling, and it would be troubling to see it kind of continue under the next president if the next president doesn't have anything positive to say about free market, the free market and capitalism and all that.
Well, I'm really hoping we get to keep him until 2024. I'm really hoping. I think we will. So, and then after that, I think the Democrats are going to make such damn fools of themselves between now and then that they're either going to have to put their house in order or they're going to lose in 2024 as well. But I think we've got Trump till then.
It's hard. I mean, look, I'm not in the business of making these kinds of predictions. I mean, back when Obama was on a winning streak and the Democrats were winning, it looked like Republicans would never win again. Now it kind of looks like the opposite. Like, oh, Trump, and he had his own Congress. I know, like, some people are probably going to watch this conversation and like be frustrated that I'm not being more like anti-Trump. But the truth is, this isn't something I pay close attention to, and I don't see election politics as where the battle needs to be waged. I'm much more concerned with culture, and culturally, I'm troubled by the right. I mean, of course, it's the left that I'm troubled by the most, but I'm troubled by the alternative that the new right is offering. I'm upset by the trending towards nationalism, the trend towards, religion. Like I said, it's not taking us anywhere positive, and this is why this is the danger. This is the problem with being motivated by a negative, being anti-left or anti-Islam or even anti-nationalism or anti-religion isn't going to tell you what you're for. You need positive values, and that's where objectivism, I think, can be that.
Yeah, it's individual rights is the key politically. I mean, we're talking about how we're going to run a nation, so it's individual rights. And if that's true, then if there's a tradition of individual rights somewhere, then that would be a good tradition. It maybe not perfect, but it would be a good tradition. And we do have that with the Constitution. So,
yeah, but do we agree that invoking tradition as a justification for anything is not a winning? It's not a winning strategy. Just the way that capitalism being upheld on traditional grounds doesn't do anyone any good in the big picture.
Yeah, but but the United States of America exists, and it keeps on existing. So, and not everything is just floating philosophy and ideas and abstractions. Some things happen in the real world. It's true that religion is bad and totalitarianism is bad and stuff, but in the real world, people write down laws and then they defend themselves. And we can't forget that. We can't forget that this shit's happening in the real world. It's not all just floating philosophy. Philosophy happens in the real world. Did that address anything you say, or am I just...
I mean, I think so. I think I'm picking up some bits and pieces here. So, I mean, the fact we still have a country with an element of rule of law, the fact that we're not completely ruled by men, and maybe you would even say we're mostly still living under rule of law. There's a lot to be happy about, especially in the context of history. We still have a lot to be glad about. But again, it is troubling. It is troubling to see that virtually nobody is championing individual rights in the arena, and even fewer people are championing reason as a faculty of the individual. So it's frustrating. I do like. I guess let me tell you, as an audience member, I'd like to see you. I guess like, yeah. I mean, like, I guess let's see some. Let's see you hone. I know you did that thing about Sam Harris a little while ago. I haven't actually watched that yet, but I was glad to see that because he's sort of seen as like an alternative to the new left. He's sort of maybe more of an old lefty. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it ultimately is epistemological, and ultimately the right needs to be defeated by the end of the day as well. They do need to be defeated, or else we all lose. The way I see it.
Well, that's like saying, yeah, the Nazis are bad, but we need to lower taxes in America too.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting for you to invoke the Nazis that way, because you've seen the movie Cabaret, right? Liza Minnelli. Oh, it's a great movie, great. It's classic. I think it's made in the 70s or 80s. Liza Minnelli. They're living in the Weimar Republic, and at one point, through the course of the movie, I mean, it's about performers and stuff. It's not about politics, but through the course of the movie, you start to see these Nazis is showing up to different events and putting on, singing and all these things. And by the end of the movie, it's just Nazis are just filling the audience. It's very spooky. But at one point in the movie, you can hear a guy's voice saying, "Oh, these Nazis are just here to keep the communists out. We'll deal with them once the communists are out of the picture." And I think I'm worried by people who say that beating the left is like the only thing to do. The left, as Ayn Rand points out, the left wins by default. The question is, how are you beating? How do you plan to beat the left? What alternative are you providing? And when everyone around us, right and left, they all agree that altruism is the correct moral code. They all agree that the individual's rights should somewhere be subjugated to the interests of the group. Then I think we're in big trouble.
All right, so you live in a kingdom that has an edict that you're able to speak your mind, and there's a kingdom attacking you that is going to enslave you and turn you into a helot. Do you defend your kingdom?
Yeah.
Yeah. The Constitution of the United States and the flag of the United States of America is the only patch of dry ground on the planet. Everybody else is in lifeboats.
Yeah.
So the United States of America, the Constitution of the United States of America, flawed though it is the rallying point for free people.
No, I agree. I don't even see the right upholding the Constitution these days. To them, everything is on the table. Everything is up for debate. So, like I said, the new right, I would say, if I had to characterize what they're calling the new right, they're sort of a break. They're sort of branching out. They're sort of breaking off from the sort of Mark Levin type of conservatives that talk about the Constitution and how the Supreme Court is violating people's rights. Now we're looking at, quote, conservatives, whatever that even means, who are basically with yesterday's leftists. They're saying, hey, we can engineer society. We can decide who has rights and who doesn't. We dispense rights as favors. We'll decide if we want to nationalize Facebook or not. I mean, it is the right who is pushing for regulation. It is the right that is going to ruin the internet for everyone and hand it over to the government.
Well, the debate is on the right. The left wants to take over the internet. The left wants the government to own the internet. Does the right, can they convince the right to do it as well? That's the question, isn't it?
But interestingly, I haven't heard anyone on the left, at least recently, talk about regulating the internet. They seem much more focused on other arenas, such as misgendering in the workplace and so on.
They already own the internet. They already own Google and Facebook and YouTube. They already own it.
The companies are largely owned by left-leaning people, but they are not. It's not the left who are championing government annexation, if I could use that word, of Google and Facebook and Twitter.
Now I think we got to do something to stop them from using these as platforms and calling them publishers or whatever. That you know the controversy. about.
Yeah, and it's bullshit calling
Yeah.
them publishers. They're not publishers.
Yeah.
And it's Ben Shapiro who came up with this nonsense. He counseled Ted Cruz. Apparently, Ted Cruz isn't enough of a lawyer. He needs to go to Ben Shapiro now for legal insight. And Cruz went along and grilled Zuckerberg about this in Congress. And this was the right. This was Christmas for the right wingers, for the new right, for a lot of the old right, for Tucker Carlson, God curse his name, and everybody else. These are right wingers. These are anti SJWs. These are anti feminists. I mean, these are the alleged defenders of individualism who want to protect the individual's rights from being censored by Facebook or by Google. And the solution to our problems, as it always has been politically, is to deregulate more and to lower taxes. And whenever we talk about Silicon Valley, I think the first thing to bring up should be we live in a largely regulated economy. So even though Silicon Valley is moving the quickest, we need to also, the food that they eat in Silicon Valley, the medical coverage that they have, the money that they borrow in order to develop their businesses are highly, highly, highly regulated. So let's deregulate the financial sector. Let's find me anyone today outside of objectivism and a handful of libertarians, anyone that wants to deregulate the banks, deregulate the financial sector. And that, of course, is the lifeblood of every industry. So but again, here, talk to Sargon, tell him the solution is to deregulate the banking sector. He'd say you're crazy. No, the answer is a digital Bill of Rights. And, so that seems to be the solution that people are coming up with. And again, this is why, like I mentioned earlier, like when you say words like objectivist, I think you're getting people to associate you with the types of superficial objectivists that want to regulate Facebook, that want to give everyone a digital Bill of Rights. So I would really advise against it. But obviously you can make that decision for yourself.
Yeah, I know. I've tried to get away from the term, but I just keep finding people who don't look any different from leftists calling themselves objectivists.
What makes you say that?
They slander people, they lie about people, they do things without letting the audience judge for themselves, and that's a leftist tactic for sure.
They slander.
Yeah, saying untrue things about people. Yeah,
but doesn't that tend to happen when you have a bunch of boomers on the internet, like with bad communication?
Yeah, but if I say something about somebody, I'm gonna say who it is, and the audience can judge for themselves. I'm not gonna hide anything from anybody. If I say anything about anybody, I'm gonna say who I'm saying it about.
Okay, I think look, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm a hypocrite because I've been a bit of a loudmouth, but I think a little bit of benevolence could go a long way here, and people could sort of, I don't know, find some reconciliation. But it seems, look, as someone who's sort of half paying attention to everything developing, it seems like some miscommunication. To me, it seems that way more than anything.
Oh, before I forget, I did want to mention Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. But yeah, back to Amy Peikoff and James Valiant and Keith Weiner. I'm not planning on spending a lot of attention or time on it, because if they're wrong, time will prove me right, and if I'm wrong, then I'll have to change my tune in time. My real fight is not with objectivists or anyone who calls themselves an objectivist. That's for sure. Yeah. But
okay, well, so like you and I, we just had a great conversation about Trump, about, if we didn't really talk about China or immigration very much, but like we talked about Trump, obviously a hot button issue among everyone, including objectivists. He's a polarizing figure, even among objectivists as well as everyone else. We got to have this conversation, in good faith. Can't that be everyone? Couldn't you do that? With the so-called objectivists?
Sure. Yeah. Let's
Yes.
line up a conversation. I'll go on their show. They won't talk to me, apparently.
Do you think maybe you're making yourself a victim when you say they won't talk to me, when Look, think about how many creeps a day are on the internet. Like, think about it, like when you're in the public light, you're constantly approached by creeps and all types of freaks. So you learn to kind of have your defenses up and to kind of profile people, sometimes to a fault. So isn't there kind of a way to kind of be sensitive to that and
Well,
show your
per-
go ahead.
perhaps they've made a mistake in their judgment, in which case I leave it up to the judgment of the audience. But what would I tone down or pull back? My use of a meme? I mean, let's not be ridiculous.
No, but you could say, "Oh, I did that. I don't know. I can see why that meme came off a certain way, but that's not what this is. Rather than escalating matters. But I don't know. I mean, look, this isn't like this is not something I've thought much about. I just my inclination when I come down the street, people point and say, "Oh, here comes that bridge builder. He's the guy who builds bridges and brings people together." So I'm just suggesting a little bit of good faith and benevolence could go a long way. But
Yeah, I'm definitely open to discussions. For example, I've never said that Trump's an objectivist, which is what he said I said. So,
you never said what?
that Trump is an objectivist.
Yeah, I don't think you said that either.
No, that's insane. Now, the audience could check for themselves if he would have told them who he was talking about, but that's on him now. I'm going to go forward as though I'm an objectivist, and if they're not going to drive the bus, then I'll take over driving the bus, but maybe there will be two buses. Who knows? Or maybe it's cars or horses. I don't know. But we're going in the same direction. The problem is if they're going to act like leftists, they're not going to be effective. I mean, if they're going to lie about people and slander and not debate and not discuss topics that are brought to their attention and just ban people for bringing up topics, I mean, how is that ever going to be productive? Ever?
I mean, put that way, it doesn't sound productive at all. I could only speculate that people who are constantly being, like, every time Yaron does his podcast, there's like people in the chat room talking about Jews being, puppet masters running the world. So it's somewhat understandable that at a certain point, like he'll just, I don't know if he does this, but it would be understandable to a degree if at a certain point he just starts blocking anyone that goes anywhere near being pro-Trump. But I would hope not, though. I would hope he and everyone else is able to discriminate more effectively. And anyway, look, I hope this conversation here serves to help give you kind of a human face, because people, they say, "Oh, if this guy's cool with Rucka, then maybe he's not so bad."
Yeah, I hope so. That would be good.
Yeah.
Well, should we? Is that a wind down? Are you discontinuing, or should we?
I think we covered a lot. I don't really know what else to discuss. I'm looking forward to listening back to this and seeing if I expressed myself the way I had hoped to. But I would like to see more people. Let me issue this to all my brothers and sisters out there who maybe have a strong opinion on Trump or immigration or China. Why don't you reach out to MrCropper here? I'm sure he'd love to give you a platform on his channel, and he's looking for people to talk to. Now, let me say this about China. Like, my understanding has been that they've moved from communism to more of a allowing free market elements in certain pockets of China, and that's where we see, Nike setting up shop over there, Apple setting up shop over there, various Chinese individuals able to go from being miserable, starving farmers or miserable, starving children to being, well-dressed, healthy members of society. I mean, am I wrong? Have I been misguided?
From 1923 to 1928, they had free economic policy in Russia, and you were allowed to employ up to 10 individuals. And then in 1928, they shut it all down. They took all that wealth away, and so that happens from time to time. All of the food of certain types grown in Russia was grown privately, like virtually all of it. Certain types of fruit and stuff were grown on those little teeny plots of land next to cottages, even though it was way less than 1% of the cultivated land in the nation. A lot of their food came from those tiny, tiny plots. The productivity of communist and socialist regimes comes from the extent to which they allow capitalism to thrive inside their system. So this is not new. We've seen it many times before.
Okay. At what point does China become free enough? Is it that their political system needs to be a sort of a parliamentary or like kind of a constitutional republic? Does their nature of their government need to change in order for them to be what you'd consider a somewhat capitalist country?
You have to remove the ability of the government to spend the wealth of society. So, like in our society, the government spends a lot of it, but they have to get it through us. We are the ones who set the taxes. You know, the representatives of our society set the taxes. Isabel Patterson went over this. She said when you get a whole bunch of wealth into a system that cannot distribute the wealth properly, then it will short-circuit the system. And that, we see it over and over again. We pump wealth into these crappy societies and they turn around and become violent. We see it over and over again. It happened in Germany in the 30s. They turned around and used all that wealth that we built and borrowed them in all the factories in the 1930s, and what did they use it for? And Japan, all of the carriers that we fought were made of American steel. We shipped all that steel to them. And every single time we have pumped the wealth and energy of free economies into controlled economies, they blow up. And sometimes people get hurt. A lot of people get hurt. So I'm afraid we're just doing it again. I don't see, why is this time different? I don't see why.
I don't know.
Looks like it might end badly if Isabel Patterson's right.
Well, again, I can only say this is not something I am very knowledgeable about, but I would invite and encourage others to discuss this with you so that I can hear every side of this issue.
Very good.
Yeah. All right. Well, good times. And I guess with that being said, I'm out of questions. This was a good conversation.
Yeah.
What is it about us? What is it about us that we're able to have these discussions? You know who I'm impersonating?
No.
The objectivist figurehead himself, Dave Rubin, the future of the movement, the guy, well, the present and future of the movement. What is that's how he talks to the IDW. What is it about us that we're able to have these conversations? Anyway, all right. Well, I guess I'll stop recording here. Everyone like, subscribe, and share, and subscribe to Brandon Cropper. Peace and love in the Middle East.
Thank
right.
you.
You still recording?
I am still recording. Let me just say thank you, ladies and gentlemen, all in mind.